Hello, and welcome to the second tutorial on auto layouts for Swift. We're going to continue where we left off on lesson 1. Now, let's look at our icons down here on the bottom. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hover it, and notice here this icon right here is Resolve Autolayout Issues. The one to the left of that is Add New Constraints. To the left of that is Align. The one following that is Embed and Stack, and finally Update Frames. In this lesson, we're going to go ahead and look at the first one, Resolve Auto Layout Issues. So I'm going to go ahead and take my box. I'm going to click on it. And notice here where we left off, we had constraints. And if I look over here on the document outline for this box, and with respect to the view, that I have 4 constraints. And if I'm going to click on the first one, and we look at our utility, notice here our first item is the box top, and the relationship is equal to the second item, which is our top layout guide bottom. What this means is we're looking at the top layout guide, and at the bottom part of the top layout guide is equal to the box top. So let me click onto the second one, and we have the first item is the super view trailing margin is equal to the box trailing. Click on the third one, and we have the box leading relationship is equal to the second item, which is a super view dot leading margin plus 50. And finally, the last one is the bottom layout guide, which is the first item is the bottom layout guide top is equal to the box bottom plus a constant of 121. So notice here that also on the left hand side that we have different icons for each one. So if you look at the top one, that is a box top equals the top layout bottom with the icon here, the little spring going from the top to the bottom. This one has a spring going from the right to the left, and this one has a spring going from the left to the right, and the bottom one has a spring going up and down. So the up and downs usually tell you that, hey, you have a constraint with respect to going up and down, and this one has with respect to the left to the right, and this one is from the right to the end. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is click on the box, and I'm going to go to this first icon down here on the bottom, which is Resolve Auto Layout Issues, and I'm going to click on it. Notice here we have two options here and two sets of two options. We have reset to suggested constraints and clear constraints, and we have a second one that says reset to suggested constraints and clear constraints. The first one is just for the selected view. The second one will reset or clear constraints for all views in the view controller. So for example here, if I had several boxes labeled box 1, box 2, box 3, and I had just the first one selected, and I click on the Resolve Auto Layout Issues, that if I just click on this first one, it'll just reset that first one. If I have 3 or 4 different views, and I click on the bottom one, it will clear all of them, or excuse me, reset all of them, or clear all the options here. So what I'm going to do is, like I said, just click on it and go to the icon, and I'm going to clear the constraints. When I clear the constraints, notice here that the constraints disappeared in your document outline. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on the box, and I'm just going to shrink it a little and drag it anywhere in the view. Then I'm going to go back to the icon. It says Resolve Auto Layout Issues. Click on it and set Reset to Suggested Constraints. Notice here that what Xcode did was automatically insert some 4 constraints with respect to what it thinks you might want. So if I click on the constraints caret, notice here I have the box top, which is up and down. I have a right to left, which is the trailing. I have a leading, which is left to right. And then I have the bottom. So notice here if I click back on the top one, I have the box top is equal to the top layout guide bottom plus 200. I'm going to go ahead and change that to 100. Hit enter, and it shrunk by 100. Click on the second one, box trailing. This bar right here, I'm going to change this to 25. Great. Now I'm going to go to the third one, the bars highlighted. I'm going to change this to 50. And finally, I'm going to go to the bottom one and I'm going to change this one to, let's say, 75. Hit OK. So notice here that we still have four constraints. And I'm going to go back to the auto layout and I'm going to clear the constraints and they'll all disappear. Now I'm just going to shrink this box again or just change the shape. And let's say that I move it where both the lines highlight in the middle. So again, when I take it and I'm going to center it and automatically put it there. So when I do a reset resolve auto layout issues and hit reset to suggested constraints, notice here that I still have four constraints. However, this time I have a box leading to the leading margin, which is this one right here. Notice here the spring icon is going from left to right. And now I have two different icons here. Now this one is a box center Y, 2 is equal to center Y. Right there is showing the line going here, splitting at center. Now I have a center X to a center X, box center X to center X. And notice here there's a line going up and down saying, hey, that the center X is equal to the box center X. And finally, I still have my box top equal to the top layout guide bottom plus 114. Again, just for to remember, top layout guide is this line right here. And what we're actually saying is this top layout guide bottom, the bottom part of this top layout guide is equal to the box top right here plus 114, which we get there. Now I can go ahead and change this to, let's say, 50 again, and it'll reset that one. But notice here that we still have four constraints. 1, 2, 3, 4. We still have four constraints. So let's say that I delete one of the constraints. I'm going to go ahead and delete the box leading to the leading margin plus 63. I delete it. Now notice what happens here. We have a red icon show up in the document outline. If I do click on this one, it's going to tell you that you have a missing constraint. Notice here, and it tells you an idea of what's going on here. It says it needs a constraint for the X position or the width. So we can either add a width or an X position. So I'm going to go back. If I click on the red icon, you can automatically add the missing constraint and click on it, and it added the missing constraint. So if I click back on structure, notice here it added the constraint that we were missing. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. Again, I'm going to delete it, and the red box comes up again. So let's do this manually. It's saying X position. So let's go ahead and add an X position. So that means that I need to either add a position going from here to here or here to here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to structure, and I am going to go to the box, and I'm going to hit control drag from my box to my view. And when we do that, notice here we do have three constraints highlighted. So we needed an X position. So we can do a leading space to container margin or a trailing space to container margin. I'll go ahead and click on the second one, a trailing space. Notice here it added the constraint, and notice here our red arrow disappeared. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Notice here it reappeared. So at that time what I did was I added an X position. This time I'm going to add a width. So I'm going to go back and click on structure. I'm going to go back to box, and I'm going to hit control drag from the box to the view. Select it, and this time I'm going to click on equal width. Click on that, and notice here it disappeared. The red icon disappeared, but we have an orange yellow icon. If I click on it, notice here that it's just saying misplaced values this time, because what we did was we added a constraint, but the frame is not updated equally to what it's supposed to be. It's expecting a 0 and a width of 375, but our actual is 79 and 217. So all we need to do to correct that is we can just click on here on the yellow sign triangle, and we can just do an update frames, fix misplacement, and it'll automatically update it. So notice here what we did say, that we wanted equal widths. We want the box width to be equal to the width, in which it is, because we set it equal. So if I click on here, um, let's do a constant of 50 and see what happens. Whoop, too big. So let's do a negative 50. See what happens. It brings it in, because we're saying the box width is equal to the super width minus 50. Now I'm going to go back and click on the Resolve Auto Layout Issues. Oops, need to click on the box. Now click on it and clear the constraints. I'm going to drag it to another size and click on suggested, reset to suggested constraints, and it adds 4 constraints. Let me undo that and let me explain what's going on here. Okay, so notice here, the last time we did an equal width, put it in the center, and when we added the four, when we said reset to suggested constraints, it added 4 constraints of a box center equals for the y and the x, and it gave us a leading margin and a top. So now I'm going to undo all that, click on here on the box, clear it, and let's say I move it offset. So I move it down a little, and notice here that I only show one blue line showing up in the middle. So now when I hit reset, notice here we get constraints again. However, this time we only have one box center is equal to center X, but the other ones are showing a top, a left, and a bottom, because we do not have it centered. So now if I click on the box again and clear the constraints, and I move it, remember we started off here, we had an equal center X and a center Y. Then I moved it down this way, and we only had one center. Now let's move it again offset one more time. So now when I hit reset to suggested constraints, this time I am going to get 4 constraints. However, I am going to get a trailing, a leading, a top, and a bottom. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear it one more time. Click on the box and let's clear the constraints. So now if I move it back up and move it to the left where the horizontal line shows up, notice here we should know what happens if we hit reset. Our constraints pops up, and we have a trailing, we have a top, we have a leading, and we have our center Y, because we have it on the blue line in the center. Okay, so I'm going to click on it one more time, and let us go ahead and clear the constraints, and let's go ahead and offset it up to the top. Here we go. Let's go ahead and put it right there, and let's see what happens. Reset. Good. We still have a top, leading, right, trailing, and a bottom. So now we have our 4 constraints. Now let's say I just drag this over here anywhere else. Boom. Notice here what happens here. We get orange because of the fact that we moved our box. However, and we have our constant was adjusted. However, this does not match what our layout, our frame looks like. So what happens is we have 4 orange. So when we click up here on the icon, notice here we're expecting, what we're expecting is this, and we have actual this. So notice here on this one, I'm just going to update the frame, fix misplacement, and then put it back. Okay, so if I go back and hit undo, okay, and I click on it again, and I update the constraints and hit fix misplacements, it put it there. Okay, again, so let me undo this. Boom. Okay, and explain to you one more time what's going on here. If I click on the orange, if I update the frames, it's going to set the frame in the canvas to match the constraints. So that's what we're doing. We're updating the frame in the canvas to match the constraints, and it's going to put it back where it belongs. Okay, so I'm going to undo that and click on it again. But now this time I can update the constraints. Set the constant for each constraint attached to the view to match the current views and the value of the canvas. So what we're talking about is what we got right here. So if I click on that one, hit fix misplacement, it updates the constraints. So notice here now I have a constraint of 87, 66, 225, and oops, last one was 111. So again, this one here says 87. So I'm going to edit undo. Again, go back here and notice here that we have a plus 87. This is what the constraint shows. Okay. So again, if I hit update constraints, it's going to adjust it to the new constraint numbers. I click on update constraints and fix misplacements, and the constraints constants were updated to reflect what we have. So if I click back on structure, notice here we have the 87, 111, 66, and 225. So let's say if I move this again, let's say I move this again and all four places, I should get them all, the constraints turn orange again. Let go. They did change because the new constants now is showing what this reflects. I adjusted it to 104, 49, 106, and 49. So now, again, what do you think is going to happen here? Here's the dotted line. Where's the frame? So if I click over here on the orange, and I click here, update frames means it's going to put it back originally where it was at. Because that is, let me hit cancel. Let me go back, click on it. Here is the update frame. Right there. So if I'm going to update the frames, it's going to move it back to this dotted line, dash line. And if I update the constraints, it's going to put it here and update the constraints in the orange right here. So again, if I click, update frames, fix misplacements, it put it back over here originally where it's supposed to go because that's where the dotted line was at. If I go back to edit, undo frames, and I click on the icon again and I update the constraints and click on that, it's going to fix misplacement. It's going to adjust the frames, the constant to reflect the new values that you moved it to. Okay, so I'm going to click back on structure and move this one more time. Now let's say that I move it towards the center. Okay, again, it turned orange. Orange just means that you have misplacements, that the constraints are there, but the constraints are misplaced. So I'll click on it again. Again, there's our dash line right there. So this was with respect to the frame, and this is with respect to the constraint. So again, we should understand now what we're dealing with. Click on the triangle, update frames, it's going to move it back. Okay, edit, undo frames, click on it again, update constraints, and fix misplacements, and it updated the frames, the constraints. Yeah. Alright, that concludes lesson 2 on auto layouts, and we'll see you for lesson 3. Thank you very much.